Let's just put our hand over our eyes and open our eyes. I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today. And now I open my ears. I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today. Now, if you just put your hand over your heart, and I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today. The spiritual truth that I'm working with today is that conditions have no power over you. People have no power over you. Places have no power over you. Things have no power over you. Unless, of course, we give it our permission to have power over us. Our work really is to recognize where we've given permission to conditions to have power over us, and then for us to take it back. We need to look at the economy and say, have we given the economy permission to have power over me? Have we given my in-laws to have power over me? And I love our in-laws, baby. I love those in-laws. I do, but maybe some of you don't, and so we want to take it back. Wherever you might have given power away in your life, you want to be able to take it back. If you've given power to your adult children, it's time to take your permission back for them to have power over you. If you've given permission to your job to have power over you, you need to take your permission back. They don't get to have power over you. Now look, that doesn't mean that you don't have to go to work. What that means is when you get to work, you don't give anybody permission to tell you how to think, what to say, how to say it. You take all that permission, how to feel. You take that permission back. Because that's a permission that comes from inside of you. Anything that is out there on the external that makes you think that you are less than a complete, whole representation of the presence of God on the planet, you got to take your permission back from that voice to make you feel anything less than whole, perfect, and complete. Foreclosures, bankruptcy, diagnosis, hurt feelings, disappointment in yourself about how much weight you've gained or you've lost. All conditions. They're signposts. They need to be looked at. We need to look at those things, but we don't let them have power over us because conditions are transitory. You are eternal. And when we can begin to see that and feel it, we'll begin to live our life in a way that spiritual people do, which is from the inside out, not the outside in. There's a lot of out there. There's a lot of out there that will tell you what to think, how to feel, and what to do. We need to live from the inside out in our life. We need to leave, when you are spiritual beings, it's easier to leave that place of fear, that place in which you feel you have to be safe, that making yourself safe is the most important thing in the world. When you're a spiritual being, you can leave that and go to the land of pure potentiality, which is often very scary. There are people in this church who have stepped out of lives that they had before and totally reinvented and recreated themselves into how they felt inside to match the outside. And every one of us in our way can begin to do that in our life. When we step into the land of pure potentiality, we have to let go of the excuses that we want to play small. We have to let go of the excuses that we don't want to grow. We're working with, and we're a practical church here, so it doesn't do me any good to tell you that we want to do that without telling us how to do that. And like Joanne, I'm a learner too. We've all got to learn this stuff. I'm working with a very powerful little book. If you were here last week, you heard me tell you that it's a book that should be read every single year. Just like the 4 agreements, just like the things in the Bible and other places, we need to keep reading it and reading it. The Bhagavad Gita or the Quran, if that's your practice. You need to read it more than one time. And so it is with this little book called The Big Leap. Now, the premise of The Big Leap is this, that each of us in our own way have an upper limit in various areas of our life. And that upper limit, once we reach it, whether it's an upper limit of money or happiness or romance or friendship or just serenity in our life, once we reach that upper limit, we have to cause ourselves an event to bring us back down. We sabotage ourselves right back into our comfort level because it's scary to pass the upper limit. Now, most of us are very much like the frogs. Many of you have heard the story of the frogs. You can put a frog in a boiling pot of water and the frog will hop out. But if you put a frog in a room temperature water and turn the flame up low, the frog will simply cook itself to death. Now, don't email me. I don't eat escargot, so it's just a little teaching story, okay? So that's all it is. But a lot of us are like that frog that's in that tepid water, and we've just kind of like, we're just dying in our own bodies. The upper limit is designed to bring life back into us. Now, one of the things that I want to be cautious about is that sometimes New Thought churches have this reputation of, they just want to get things. They just want to get more stuff. I'm not here to teach you how to get more stuff. If you stay around long, you'll learn how to get more stuff. But that's not really my goal. That's kind of a byproduct of what we do here. What we're trying to teach you to do is to be more of who you are, which is the presence of God on the planet. So when we talk about more, that's what we talk about. More passion, more compassion, more love, more generosity, more forgiveness. That's what when we talk about more, that's the more we want you to have. And you can't have it if you have your upper limit set. He talks about it in terms of a thermostat. We each have a thermostat, and we've set that thermostat in various areas of our lives. And once we reach that temperature, then we have to go back down to the comfort level. We want to, like I said last week, we want to not only push past that temperature, we want to take that thermostat off the wall, not reset it, but throw it completely out of the window so that we can begin to be more of who it is that we are. Well, last week we talked about leaving some zones. You can get the whole tape, but we asked you to leave the zone of incompetence. We asked you to leave the zone of competence. We asked you even to leave your zone of excellence and step into your zone of genius. That's where we want you to live, is your zone of genius. He says in this book, we make a big mistake thinking that we can't have a great life in every area of our lives. And some of us are experiencing that. We have a great area of our life in some areas of our lives, only to find out not so great in other areas. Some of us are making really good have a good financial life, and our relationship life is in disarray, or vice versa, or our health life is in disarray. He said when we understand the upper limit concept and we begin to work practically with it, we can begin to have a good life in every area of our life. And so that's what our work is. He says this. He said, our upper limit is held by 4 pillars. And we're going to talk about the 4 pillars this morning so that we can actually begin to look at them. Now look, probably the 4 pillars that are holding your upper limit are called hidden barriers. They're barriers that many of us are walking around with that we don't know we even have. They're common barriers, and probably not all of us have all 4 barriers. But probably all of us have more than one barrier that's holding up our upper limit. And so I'm going to go through them. I'm going to run through those this morning. The first one is The first barrier that's a hidden barrier that many of us experience is that we feel fundamentally flawed. We feel fundamentally flawed. And that barrier comes from some experience we had probably when we were a child that told us that we were fundamentally flawed. He tells the story in the book of a man named Carl. Carl was having trouble getting into a relationship. And he came to this man as a therapist. He came to the therapist. And so the therapist said, well, let's look at your upper limit problem. What hidden barrier might you have? He said, tell me a little bit about your childhood. I said, well, my parents divorced when I was 4. And soon, immediately following the divorce, there ensued a war around money for the next several years. And I went 1 week to my mom's house and 1 week to my dad's house. And so I was in one war zone 1 week and the next war zone the next week. He said, when I was about 8 or 9, my father looked at me and in a moment of alcohol-induced candor said, every time I look at you, I hate your mother more. What he did was he took that on. He said in the book, he said, what the father did was convicted Carl of a crime that Carl couldn't name and couldn't even understand. But yet he wore that for the rest of his life. And his upper limit problem was in large part due to this fact that he was walking around like he was fundamentally flawed. See, when we're fundamentally flawed, we don't understand how we got there, and so we can't fix it. So we want to ask ourselves, are there times in our lives when we have felt fundamentally flawed? Something's wrong with us, but we don't know what it is exactly. How you know you're fundamentally flawed is you try and stay small. You try and stay invisible. I hear sometimes people say, oh, I'm better working in the background. If you feel yourself saying that, maybe it's true, but maybe you have been caught by this particular hidden barrier. People try and stay small. You know, in the ecologists in the room, you know that what we say is we like to have a small carbon footprint. What I want to tell you is I want you to have a gigantic spiritual footprint. There's no reason for you to play small or stay small. Your footprint on the spiritual realm should be gigantic. And if you feel yourself playing small and staying small, you want to ask yourself these questions. If you're too willing to agree with other people who are putting you down, if you agree with them, you might have been hit. You want to take a look at this barrier called fundamentally flawed. The second one is, the second pillar that's holding up most people's upper limit is called disloyalty and abandonment. In other words, did you break with your family or your tribe's spoken or unspoken rule to get where you are? Did you break a rule to get there? For instance, I grew up in an Italian Catholic family. And within that, there are a lot of rules. One of the rules is that women aren't clergy. Another of the rules is that there's only one true church. So in order to become a religious scientist, I had to break my tribe's rule. Now, gay people, that isn't even on the table yet. That's over there for later. Okay? Right now, we're just talking about this other stuff. See? So how does it affect me now? Well, there are things I want to do in my ministry that I have not been able to do. You know, last week we talked about the problem with the glass ceiling is you can see through the glass ceiling, you just can't get yourself there. And there are things I can see through the glass ceiling that I want this church to be able to accomplish. So I have to look at this for myself. Is there something in my upper limit that I've got the thermostat set at this number of activities and people and consciousness and money? Do I have my thermostat for CSA set somewhere because I broke my family and tribe's rules? The other question you want to ask yourself is that did you fail to meet your parents' expectations. So many of us have failed to meet our parents. Even in older age, we're noticing. You can notice if you look at yourself, and I see some heads nodding, so I know you've experienced that. My brother and sister are a lot older than I am, and my brother was the first person to ever go to college in our whole entire extended family. So it was a big deal. And he became a teacher. And my parents were so proud of him that he became a teacher. And I want to tell you, this man was in his zone of genius when he was a teacher. He taught political science in a high school, and he loved it. The kids loved him. He was very creative in how he brought political science to high schoolers. And then my mother was playing bridge one day and heard from somebody she was playing bridge with that her son was a principal of a high school. So now, very proud, within 24 hours, not so much. And so my brother, God love my brother, he goes back to school, gets his master's degree, gets his administration certificate, and becomes a principal. What did he do? He left his zone of genius and went to a zone of competence. He was an okay principal. He hated it. He lost weight. He was never home for his own kids because he was always at Friday night football games or some Friday night activity. He hated it. But he didn't want to disappoint his parents because, after all, he was the first one to go to college, so he had to set the bar. Very powerful stuff, these hidden things. So we want you to just ask yourself, for the purpose of being aware, awareness is curative. Say that with me. Awareness is curative. Say it one more time. Awareness is curative. So the third hidden barrier is that we believe more success brings more burden in life. More success brings more burden in our lives. How many of us, just from the gate, felt like we were a burden in life? We were unexpected in our families. As I mentioned, my sister and brother are a lot older than I am. I'm the third and in a troubled rhythm method of the Catholic Church. And as a result of that, I was terribly unexpected, see? And I was let know it was a burden my whole life. And so here's what I have come up with. You can't be successful unless you ask for help in this life. Did you ever notice that? All the successful people in this room will tell you, I got there because I asked for some help at some point. Well, when you are a burden, when you've got that kind of a hidden barrier, what happens is you feel like you're in imposition. So you don't ask people for help in your life. And that keeps us stuck. It keeps that thermostat at a certain level. He writes a very beautiful story about this, I think. His mother was his father died when he was 3 months in utero, and he left his mother with $300 and an older brother to raise. And so she was enormously depressed, as of course you would be, through that experience. And so he went to stay with his grandparents, lived right next door, and he said they were 60-somethings and very active and really wanted to help, and so they were right there for him. And so he got, he had a good life, but he also always knew that he was a burden, and so he writes this story. I recall a painful moment when I was in my late 20s at my family gathering with my mother and brother. My first published book had just come out, and I'd bought a copy of it along for each of them. They were sitting at a table chatting when I proudly presented their books. Each of them looked at it, turned it this way and that, then put it aside without opening it or saying a word of congratulations. Then they resumed their conversation as if nothing had happened. I remember standing there dumbfounded. I didn't know about the upper limit problem at the time, so it didn't occur to me that this event was a part of a pattern set in motion long before I took my first breath. It took me years to understand what a burden upon my existence must have been. I can't imagine the struggles they went through trying to cope with my unexpected appearance in their world. It's not surprising that they would convict me of a crime of being a burden, so it's not surprising they would consider the book written by me as a burden upon their world. The point of this story, and he goes on to work with his upper limit problem, is this. The solution is not to get his parents or his brother and his mother to do anything differently. The solution is for him to deal with the patterns of his upper limit problem so that when he gives them the book the next time, they will grab it enthusiastically. See, it all comes from within out, not from without in. The last one I want to talk about is the crime of outshining. The crime of outshining. Some of us, have sisters and brothers, and our parents did not want to outshine them. So they kind of toned us down so that we didn't soar past a sister or a brother. Or what happened is we naturally soared past a sister or a brother, and we held ourselves back in so that we wouldn't outshine them. And at that moment, we created a thermostatic setting about how high we could go. He tells another great story about a middle-aged business executive who couldn't just push past in his field to the next step. And so he came to Henderson and he said, "Tell me a little bit about yourself." And he said, "Well, when I was a child, I was a piano prodigy. I was earmarked to go to Juilliard and play all over the world when I was a very little boy. Our family was poor, and so I would have to travel on a bus line to go have lessons and practice, but I did it every day, and I was very, very good." He said, "My sister, who was 2 years older, she was also very good at the piano, and we go on the bus back and forth together. Well, when his sister was 13 years old, she died of leukemia. And the family got through it, of course, as families in that kind of situation have to do. And when he was about 14 or 15, he came home on his birthday, and his parents had bought him a grand piano, a little baby grand piano, and put it in the living room. And he was so excited. He ran over to that piano. He started playing it, and he knew he wouldn't have to get on the bus anymore to go practice. He could practice whenever he wanted, and he was thrilled. And just before dinner that same night, before they were going to go into dinner and have their little dinner and cake, his mother said, "I'm so glad that we were able to buy this for you. If your sister was still alive, we wouldn't have the money to pay for that." Out of her pain, not out of her meanness, but out of her pain. And as a result, he had an upper limit problem. He just turned that piano right there. And it carried over into the rest of his professional life. Don't outshine. Now, the purpose of this sermon is not so that you're going to be mad at anybody. Don't get mad at your mother or your brother or your teacher or anybody else for doing something that created that setting for you. It's done. It's over. And they most likely did it with a good heart. Okay? The purpose of this is not to wallow in any of that, to get really into it. The purpose of it is to notice what might have set you on a pattern in which you could only go to a certain thermostatic setting so that you can look at it with grown people eyes. See, when we can look at this stuff with grown people eyes, for instance, take the situation of the little boy who was with the parents who were both warring over money. Either you've had that experience in your life or you know of good friends who have had that experience where they split up and they warred over money. When we look at it with grown eyes, we have compassion for that. We have understanding for that. Awareness is curative. And looking at it with grown eyes can also give us a sense of humor. I want to close by a little something Reverend Betsy sent me that kind of helps us understand how important grown people eyes are. 2 little boys aged 8 and 10 were excessively mischievous. They were always getting into trouble, and their parents knew all about it. If any mischief occurred in their town, the two boys were probably involved. The boy's mother heard that a preacher in town had been successfully disciplining children, so she asked if he would speak with her boys. The preacher agreed, but he asked to see them individually. So the mother sent the 8-year-old first in the morning with the older boy to see the preacher in the afternoon. The preacher, a huge man with a booming voice, sat the younger boy down sternly and said to him, "Do you know where God is, son?" The boy's mouth dropped open, but he made no response, sitting there wide-eyed with his mouth hanging open. So the preacher repeated the question in an even sterner tone, "Where is God?" Again, the boy made no attempt to answer. The preacher raised his voice even more and shook his finger in the boy's face and bellowed, "Where is God?" The boy screamed and bolted from the room, ran directly home, and dove into his closet, slamming the door behind him. When his older brother found him in the closet, he asked, "What happened?" The younger brother, gasping for breath, replied, "We are in big trouble this time. God is missing, and they think we did it." Let's take this into prayer, knowing that there's only one power and one presence, and we're it. We're in it, we're it, we're as it, we're above it, below it, around it. The presence is everywhere, and that includes us. So knowing that the presence is always saying yes, I simply turn my attention to those things that I want a yes answer to. More love on the planet. More peace between people on the planet. Food for those who are hungry. Medical care for those who are ill. Adventure for those who are bored. The presence of God is within me right now. I give thanks. I give thanks for everyone who contributed to this service and to CSA. I release this word into the law, and together we say, and so it is.